So our gospel lesson this morning comes from Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 9, page 44. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. And then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." And suddenly when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. And as they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, good morning. We're glad to be here, and we are somewhat overwhelmed by the welcome we've received, and I thank you for that and for all that is to come. Thank you for the children's sermon, which was completely different from what I was told. So, who is this guy anyway? You know, I read the brochure, and I thought, wait a minute, who is that guy? Many years ago, my first Sunday out of seminary in Glen Burnie, Maryland, the pastor had a dialogue sermon. He set some chairs up in the chancel, and he had a microphone and some seminarians and me. And he began to pass the microphone around and ask questions. And his question for me was, well, what do you think ministry is about? You know, I'd been there a week. I didn't have an idea. So I cooked up something about the people are walking on the way with God, and the minister's there with them walking and pointing the way. And he asked me again in a different way what I thought ministry was, and I said, you know, the guy who's just pointing the way on the side of the road. And I kept saying that. And I still believe it. I've developed much more sophisticated ways of saying it, but basically that's what the minister does, is walk with you on God's journey that we're all on and kind of point the way. So when we read the text today, we might be tempted to ask that same question. Who is this guy? We thought we knew. We thought that Jesus was a teacher and a healer and someone who was really close to God. And suddenly there he is glowing. There he is glowing with Moses and Elijah. Now, Moses is the one that God gave the law to back in the Old Testament. And Elijah was considered the greatest of the prophets. So Moses and Elijah represent the whole tradition of the law and the prophets. They are a kind of representation of the entire Jewish tradition. And someone always asks, well, how did these disciples, these fishermen, know what Moses and Elijah looked like? Well, they were cultural icons, and everybody knew what Moses looked like, just like everybody knows what, Henry VIII looked like. We've never seen Henry VIII, but we just kind of know. And they had the same thing. They'd never actually seen Moses or Elijah, but they knew how they were supposed to look. And there Jesus is, talking to them. And to make matters worse, he's transformed. He's not just Jesus, he's Jesus revealing the glory of God. This is Jesus as he really is. And to the extent that they could see his glory and live through it, this is how he really looks. So he's revealed as much more than a teacher, much more than just a healer. He's much more than a man very close to God. He's the incarnation of God. And when you think about the incarnation, it makes your brain hurt. So let's have a lesson from geometry. Remember geometry? Geometry you either hated or loved. I liked it, so we're going to study geometry today. A plane in geometry, it's like a big flat surface, right? And there's a plane, and then there's another plane that intersects with it, right? It looks exactly like this. And where they meet, right there, is a line. And the line is in both planes at the same time. The line is the only thing in both planes at the same time. Well, Jesus is fully human, that's this plane. And he's fully God, that's this plane. And right where they meet, that's the line. That is Jesus incarnate in human flesh as the Son of God. If he moved a little bit in one plane, he'd only be human. And if he moved a little bit the other way, he wouldn't be human. So he's got to be right there on that line. And that's a way to understand the mystery of the incarnation. And here on that mountain, he gave those disciples a glimpse of what that incarnation really looks like and involves. Now, some of you are hoping that I wasn't going to do all of that. Some of you are hoping I was just going to talk about my family. So let me give you the rundown. There's lots of them. Susan and I have been married for 30-some years, and she was a special education teacher way back when. And then we began to have children. And so over the years, she's worked as a preschool teacher, and she's worked as an aide in a vocational technical high school in the cooking class, in the welding class. She loves to cook and bake and not so much to weld. And she spent many years just at home wrangling the children and did very well at that. Our oldest child is Sarah. Sarah's married to Mark. They have a little girl named Lyra, and they are expecting a second child in April. And as my grandmother would have said, Lyra is a pistol. And they live in San Francisco, and Mark works for Yelp. Our son John lives in Oakland, California, and does something with sales and computers. And no one knows exactly what, but if you can make it, he can sell it. And his story is a very long one, but he's doing well, and we give thanks to God. Peter started out in Washington, D.C. after college working for nonprofits, and then he met a girl, and she was on her way to Los Angeles, so he said, there's nonprofits in Los Angeles, and he followed her out there. She's long gone. He's living in Los Angeles and doing a master's in urban planning at UCLA. And then there's Emily. Emily lives and breathes to play soccer. That's all she ever wanted to do was play soccer. Her soccer team in high school was the state champions, probably the best team in the country, at least the second best. She played soccer in college and ended up with a major in accounting, and she's an auditor in Pennsylvania at a local firm, and she's kind of mad at us for leaving her there alone, but, Then there's Madeline. And Madeline came to us a few years ago and said, I don't want to go to college. And I said, good. Then she said, I want to go to Perth, Australia. I want to go to Youth with a Mission in Perth, Australia. And we raised the money, and she went 3 months of discipleship training and 3 months of ministry in South Africa and India with people who had been victims of human trafficking. And that's what most people do when they go to Youth with a Mission. Madeline then is invited to stay and teach groups in that same school. So she did that for a couple of years. And she went to Manila for a couple of years and managed a whole bunch of teams that were coming to Manila for ministry. And now she's back in Perth, and she's the leader of the school focused on human trafficking. She's been to 10 or 12 countries, and she's just absolutely fearless for Jesus. Our youngest is Courtney. And I have a policy not to use my family as sermon illustrations unless I can disguise it so well that they don't even know they are the illustration. And I promise not to embarrass her today. And as for me, I'm an incurable theologian. I love books, I love airplanes, I love languages. In one town, the local newspaper decided that this meant I was fluent in Spanish. And I can't even order a taco. So, Spanish, yeah, but French and German and several other languages, that's just fun. I'm excited to be here and be your pastor. I'm not perfect, but I'll do my best. You have a large number of projects. You are very well organized. You're doing things, you're doing the right things, you're doing them well. So hats off to you, and hats off to all of my predecessors. I was looking through your history book, and I saw a picture of Robert Bloomer. He was pastor here around the time I was born, around 1958, 60, in there. I knew Robert Bloomer when I was in junior high school at church camp. He taught the Bible class. And then in college, I was at Wofford, and my parents moved from Easley to Dillon, South Carolina. And he became the interim at Easley right after they moved away. So I went over there and heard him preach a few times. It's just amazing that things come around like that, isn't it? It's amazing what God does. And God did an amazing thing with Jesus on that mountain of transfiguration. He's transfigured. The word is metamorphosis. He's changed. He reveals who he really is. And we know him as he really is. And we know what he wants with us. Peter, James, and John tell us what they saw and how they reacted, mistakes and all. We get a glimpse of Jesus as he really is. And so we know he's unique. We know he's God. We know that we are really following the Christ, the Son of God, who saves us from sin and gives us new life. And we find that new life as we worship together. We find it as we work together. We find it as we come to Christ's table. And at the table, Jesus gives us grace and strengthens us, just as bread and wine strengthen us after a day's work. He gives us sustenance for our journey. So we come to the table together, all of us, even this guy who's just standing there pointing. All of us are together. Thanks be to God. Amen.